When a liberal host challenged Riley Gaines to define woman, she fired back with a response so powerful it left the audience stunned and the narrative in ruins. The NBC studio buzzed with anticipation. Production crew members moved briskly, prepping the hall for an exclusive interview with a high-profile political activist. The host, known for his sharp tongue and controversial takes, had kept the guest's identity a closely guarded secret. Neither his team nor the audience knew who was about to walk through those doors. In a relaxed mood backstage, the host joked with his staff, confidently boasting how he was going to bulldoze the guest, just as he famously bulldozes his opponents within minutes. His smirk said it all. He believed he was in control. Moments later, the studio lights dimmed as the live audience took their seats. Then, the main doors swung open. A striking figure stepped into the room. The energy shifted instantly. The spotlight hit her face, and gasps echoed through the hall. It was none other than Riley Gaines, the bold and unapologetic activist, widely recognized as the leading voice for fairness in women's sports. Her presence was magnetic. Before she could reach the stage, a female fan from the audience gallery leapt forward and embraced her. The room held its breath. Riley smiled warmly and said, "Thank you," her voice calm but commanding. The tone was set. The host wasn't just facing a guest, he was facing a movement. The host then introduced her with unusually polite words, masking a smug undertone behind his practiced charm, and motioned for her to take a seat. As the applause settled, he leaned back and quipped with a smirk, "Riley, glad you're here. I figured it's only fair to hear from someone who thinks protecting women's sports means keeping out better athletes." Laughter rippled through parts of the audience, forced, uncertain. Riley didn't flinch. She sat tall, her expression unreadable, the smile on her face more calculated than kind. The temperature in the room shifted. The game had started, and Riley wasn't here to play. Riley heard the jab loud and clear. Better athletes, she thought, her jaw tightening beneath the surface. Typical tactic. Bait, provoke, derail. But she knew better than to take it. This wasn't about trading insults. It was about standing firm. Let him play smug. Her silence was a strategy. Let the facts do the talking. The lights above felt hotter now, casting long shadows behind the stage. Tension coiled in the air like a storm cloud. The host leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his smile tight and smug. Predatory. "Riley," he said slowly, savoring the moment, "you've made a lot of noise about fairness in women's sports, but maybe what you call unfair is really just progress. Ever think of that?" His voice had the tone of a man trying to corner his guest with civility as camouflage. Riley didn't move. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, her expression unreadable, calm, but sharpened at the edges. "Progress doesn't mean erasing boundaries," she said, voice steady. "Women's sports exist to protect a biological reality." The host suddenly cut her off, his tone turning, the smile gone. "Define a woman." A few gasps echoed through the room. Laughter bubbled from the left side of the audience, a mix of amusement and nervous tension. Some eyes widened, while others looked on in eager anticipation, clearly enjoying the host's challenge. The trap had been sprung, but Riley didn't bite. Her gaze didn't drift. Her spine stayed straight. Inside, she felt the familiar flicker of fire, but not rage, purpose, precision. She had been waiting for this moment, and she wasn't here to stumble. She was here to make it count. The room held its breath. The host's fingers drummed nervously on the desk, his eyes narrowed, awaiting Riley's response, eager for any crack, any sign of weakness. But Riley didn't flinch, not even an inch. She sat straight, her posture radiating an almost unshakable calm, and for the first time in this interview, the host realized he wasn't in control. Silence hung in the air like thick smoke, as if time itself had slowed. The audience, split between nervous anticipation and an underlying sense of suspense, waited to see who would blink first. The host's voice finally broke through the quiet, low and insistent. So simple. His gaze was sharp, testing. So simple, Riley replied without hesitation, her voice a steady force. Truth doesn't need dressing up. For a split second, the host's smirk faltered. He wasn't prepared for this. He had expected her to squirm, to twist, to falter. But Riley had done none of those things. Instead, she sat there, unwavering, as if her words carried the weight of undeniable logic. He recovered quickly, though, pushing forward. But you're making it sound like a woman is only defined by biology. What about feelings, identities? Are they irrelevant? Riley's gaze never left him. The question, meant to unsettle her, seemed almost childish in its simplicity. But she wasn't rattled. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but sharp enough to slice through the air. "What's more real?" she asked, her words hanging in the silence. "A man who says he feels like a woman, or a woman who has a body that's made for being a woman?" The host's mouth opened, but the words didn't come. His eyes widened, but there was no quick rebuttal this time. The tension in the room shifted, and the audience felt it. The shift from his domain to hers. His practiced charm, his quick wit, began to evaporate in the face of Riley's calm certainty. He stumbled for a moment, his usual cocky demeanor cracking under the weight of the question. "But," he began, then stopped, unsure of where to go next. "Common sense should never be optional," Riley continued, her voice cutting through his hesitation. "You can argue all you want about feelings, but at the end of the day, biology is the unchangeable truth." The host tried again, desperately. "But what about the lived experience of transgender individuals? Isn't their identity just as valid?" For the first time in the interview, Riley's expression flickered, just for a moment. She had anticipated this question, and it was a challenge she had prepared for. "Of course their experience is valid," she said, her tone softer but no less powerful. "But experience doesn't change biology. We can respect people's identities while still holding the truth of science at the core of our conversations." The host, visibly rattled now, opened his mouth, but this time no snappy retort came. He glanced quickly at his notes, his hands momentarily shaking. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned in. They could see the host's once confident posture faltering. He had underestimated his guest. "Well, that was quite the answer," the host muttered, trying to regain some semblance of control, but his voice was strained. His usual bravado had been stripped away, leaving a thin veneer of professionalism. Riley didn't need to push. Her calm, unyielding presence had already done its work. The audience, recognizing the turning point, began to stir. Some started to clap. It was soft at first, hesitant, but then it grew louder, faster, until the entire room was filled with applause. The host, now visibly unsettled, glanced at the camera for a cue, but there was no way out. Riley had taken the reins. He tried again, but his voice lacked conviction. "So, you stand by your position?" he asked, though it sounded more like a plea than a challenge. Riley didn't hesitate. "I stand by science. I stand by truth." Her words were simple, definitive, and the audience felt the weight of them. She wasn't going to bend. Not for him, not for anyone. The applause rippled through the room again, this time louder, more sustained. It was clear now. The host had lost the upper hand. Riley's response had been calm, measured, but its impact was undeniable. It was as if she had taken control of the narrative with nothing more than the unwavering strength of her convictions. The room was heavy with anticipation, a fragile tension hanging in the air. Riley sat across from the host, her posture perfect, every word measured, every gesture deliberate. The battle of words had raged for what felt like hours, but it was clear now that the host's attempts to rattle her were faltering. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with a hint of uncertainty. But the war wasn't over yet. The host leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, as if searching for a crack in her confidence. The audience had already shifted, their support quietly moving to her side, but he wasn't ready to concede. He wasn't done yet. "So, you're telling me—" The host's voice dropped lower, as if to make his next question seem more piercing. "That you believe this issue, this complex issue, has no gray areas, that it's as simple as you're making it sound." His tone dripped with skepticism, but there was a trace of something else too. Desperation. Riley sat back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her, eyes never leaving his. "No," she replied, her voice steady but sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "There are always complexities in any issue. Life isn't black and white, but at its core, this isn't about feelings or beliefs. It's about biological reality, and we can't ignore that." The host blinked, his question having no effect on her. He hadn't expected such a calm, rational response. His eyes flickered to the audience, seeking some kind of validation, but they were still silent, watching, waiting. Riley's words, so simple and clear, had stripped the issue down to its raw truth, and no amount of rhetorical flourish would be enough to counter it. The host's lips twitched as if to respond, but no words came. He glanced at his notes, a subtle sign that he was beginning to lose his footing. The weight of his own questions seemed to settle on him. His earlier bravado, the smugness that had colored his every word, was slipping away. "Well," the host said, trying again, "that's blunt. But surely you can see that this issue is more nuanced than you're letting on." He reached for one final trick in his book, the appeal to complexity, to the gray areas he felt would undermine her stance. But Riley, without missing a beat, cut him off before he could go any further. "What's more nuanced than the truth?" she asked, her voice gaining strength, echoing in the quiet room. "You can't change biology with ideology, no matter how much you wish it were that simple. Biology doesn't care about feelings or beliefs. It just is." The host's eyebrows knit together in a mixture of frustration and confusion. He was rattled, clearly not expecting such a forceful response. His usual method of dismissing opposing views with his quick wit was failing him now. Riley had shifted the narrative in a single sentence, and the host was struggling to regain control. "But—" He tried again, but this time his voice lacked conviction. He was stammering now, grasping for a point that no longer existed. Riley's calm, unflinching demeanor stood in stark contrast to his nervous energy. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to let him know she wasn't going to let him backpedal. She wasn't going to let him twist the conversation. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, her tone soft but laced with undeniable power. "You can dress up your beliefs with all the fancy language you want, but at the end of the day, the truth remains the truth." The host opened his mouth again, but no words came out this time. His lips parted, and then closed again, as if the weight of her words had stunned him into silence. He glanced nervously at the camera, hoping for some reprieve, but there was none. He looked back at Riley, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. She wasn't just answering his questions, she was dismantling them. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned in, watching the exchange with bated breath. What had begun as a tense, combative interview had transformed into something else entirely. Riley was no longer merely defending her stance. She was schooling him, calmly and with precision, showing him that facts didn't bend to his narrative. Riley wasn't done. She could see the host faltering, trying to regain his usual fire, but the time for games was over. The truth had already spoken, and it was impossible to ignore now. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her voice lowering to a deliberate softness, but every word cutting through the room with surgical precision. "You keep asking about nuance," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "But what's more real? A man who says he feels like a woman, or a woman who has a body that's made for being a woman? Can feelings outweigh biological reality?" The host blinked, his breath hitching as her words settled in. This time, he didn't try to respond immediately. He was caught off guard, his usual quips now useless against the steady tide of her argument. There was no retort, no clever comeback, just a silence that stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. The audience, once on the edge of their seats, now seemed to settle into a quiet respect. They could feel it. Riley had just exposed the heart of the issue with an unwavering strength that left no room for counter-arguments. The host, for the first time in the entire interview, looked vulnerable. His gaze shifted from Riley to the audience, then back to his notes, where the carefully prepared questions seemed suddenly irrelevant. He took a breath, trying to regain control, but his words lacked the punch they once had. "Courage isn't about bending the truth to fit your narrative," Riley continued, her voice gaining strength again. "It's about standing firm in the face of nonsense. Common sense should never be optional." The weight of her words hit the room like a thunderclap. The host opened his mouth, but the air seemed to leave him. He faltered, unsure of how to respond, and for the first time, the tables had turned completely. The audience, who had been hanging on every word of his carefully crafted questions, now turned their attention fully to Riley. She had transformed the entire dynamic. She wasn't just answering questions, she was reshaping the entire conversation. The host glanced at the camera, trying to force a smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The energy in the room had shifted. He was no longer the dominant force in the interview. Riley was. "Well," the host stammered, trying to salvage the moment. "That was quite the answer." Riley didn't hesitate. "I stand by science. I stand by the truth," she replied firmly. The host gave a nervous laugh, his confidence gone, replaced by caution. His questions, once sharp, now seemed tentative, as if he feared provoking her. It was clear he had met his match. The final moments of the interview were a formality. Riley answered with precision, her confidence unwavering. When it ended, the applause was deafening. The host, still recovering, gave a half-hearted conclusion, lacking his usual charisma. Riley stood, composed and calm, as the applause grew louder with each step she took off the stage. She had dismantled the host's argument with nothing but truth and resolve. The power had shifted, and the audience knew it. As she exited, the thunderous applause followed her, affirming her triumph. If this moment left you speechless, just wait until you experience what happens next. Click the video on your screen to dive into a story that will push your limits, spark thought-provoking discussions, and leave you reflecting long after it's over. This isn't just a continuation, it's a game changer. Your next adventure is just one click away.